All right, hello and welcome everyone to today's Marketing Science webinar titled Science on Display, Mastering the Art of Creating Engaging Video, Podcast and Webinar Content. A big thank you to everyone who's joining us live today and also to anyone who's watching this back on demand in the future. My name is Daniel Ezell. I'm the Virtual Events Manager at AZO Network and I'm delighted to be with you all this afternoon. Today we're focusing on podcast, video and webinar content. And we'll be hearing the thoughts of Will, our video and podcast expert, Sarah, who specializes in 2D animation and social media, and Danielle, who is one of the hosts of the Something About Science podcast. I'll also be sharing some ideas on webinar content as well. And we'll also have a bonus section towards the end where we'll be hearing about post-production and editing with Zhao. Before I talk a little bit more about the format of the event, we have our one and only audience poll that should be appearing on your screen just about now. So please do share your thoughts with us there. Just be interested to see what it is that your main focus is on this next year and why it is that you've joined this webinar today. Now, we're running today's event slightly different from normal. So if you've got my email yesterday, then you'll know that a lot of the team are off to PitCon this week. So we have pre-recorded today's interview and we'll be sharing that in just a moment. You can, of course, still submit questions at any stage during the webinar and we'll answer as many as we can during the event today, or we'll follow up via email at a later date. And as I mentioned, there is a bonus section towards the top of the hour. So if you're interested in hearing and learning more about the post-production process of podcast videos and webinars as well, then stay tuned for that. There's lots of great stuff in this, and I'm sure everyone is going to leave today thinking about at least one area of their marketing. So I'll get things started in just a moment and answer any questions as and when they come up. Well, Daniel, you have recently launched the new podcast. Why did you start in the first place?
So we decided to start Something About Science because as science editors, we're really passionate about the communication of science. And we saw a gap in the market for a podcast such as ours, because we were having authentic chats in the office anyway about the science stories that we were passionate about. And we know that when others listen to other people being passionate, they really feed off it. So we felt there was a gap in the market. And we felt that the audio realm had been unexplored by us personally. And we know that through ourselves, through us listening to podcasts and just the general zeitgeist, that podcasts are becoming more and more popular and audio as a form is becoming more popular as people get busier and people's day-to-day lives and working lives aren't strictly 9 to 5 and strictly in the office. People are moving about. They're doing 2 things at once. They're multitasking. So we really wanted to cater for those people and deliver science stories to them.
So yeah, in those initial discussions when everyone was very enthusiastic about it, were there any objections to starting the podcast? Anything that you thought maybe this isn't going to work out? Things like that?
Yeah, I think the 2 main things were, firstly, the podcast market is really saturated. It seems like everyone and their best friend have a podcast these days. But that's also the thing that makes it really easy to do. I think, secondly, there's a lot of work before you even get started recording a podcast that goes into it. So that maybe would have been one of the initial pushbacks. But if you are organised and have a set vision in mind, then I don't think that's a real issue.
Yeah, let's talk about that. A lot of work element side of things. Well, you probably got some good points here as well. What are the things people need to consider?
Like Daniel said, having a sort of strong concept of what you want it to be about, the kind of feel and tone that you want to go for, the format, like all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it needs deciding before you start. There's a lot of sort of meetings and discussions that go on to sort of brainstorm the various options, like because it is kind of a blank canvas when you're starting from scratch, and it does help when you're making a series of podcasts to have some sort of defined voice for it. And yeah, deciding that up front is important. The other thing is, before you launch, you really want to have your first several months of content kind of, if not recorded, then at least planned out. Because that can be a big pitfall. People commit to, we'll do a podcast every month, and you have the first one, and then you put it out and go, hooray, we've launched one. And then for the second one, you've now got like 3.5 weeks to get it all done. You're like, right, what's it going to be about? Like, you really need to have like 2, 3, 4 months worth like ready or planned out, so you know what you're doing, so that it's like then easier to commit to that schedule and to stick to it once you've committed to it.
And Daniel, that's what we had planned with this, right? We had 3 episodes ready to go for launch date. There's a little teaser that went out a couple of weeks beforehand, and then on that launch date, you've got the 3 in the bag. So then you can work on 4, 5, 6, etc., as and when they go.
The scheduling is almost twofold. It's firstly having, like Will said, the actual episodes ready, but also your sort of social media plan as well, because it's one thing, the podcast being put out there, but if no one knows about it, then, you know, you really need to have a schedule for social media as well and make sure that you're promoting the episodes in the right way.
So let's talk a bit more about the distribution. What was the sort of the key to the distribution? How do we make sure, or if clients thinking about starting a podcast, how do they make sure that we've done all the work, hooray, we've got this amazing bit of content, how are we going to get people to listen to it?
Well, like I said, social media is really important. So one thing we do is we use audiograms, which are essentially small snippets from the episode, and we use those to promote the episodes on social media. And they're really great because they give potential listeners a snapshot of what the episode will be about and really pique their interest, because importantly, they're only about 30 seconds long. And as we know, everyone's attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. So that's really important. And another important thing is sort of us as hosts promoting the episodes. So people feel engaged with an actual person and a person behind the episode that they're interacting with on a device. So for us as hosts to say, look, we're the person behind the voice on the episode and we're promoting it, it just helps the listener feel more engaged.
This podcast's got quite a unique format, and they've got 3 hosts. What was the thinking behind that format? What other formats are there that were discussed and that are available?
Yeah, well, like I said previously, we were having really organic chats in the office anyway about how passionate we were about the content that was going up on our sites. So that was the thinking about 3 hosts and the potential to have a discussion. It's important to note as well as Azo Network, we are a network, and we thought that those discussions and that dynamic we had between the 3 of us was really good. We were aware of other science podcasts using different formats, such as one host narrating an episode, which is interspersed with interviews and other, I don't know if, Will, you want to hop in with any other formats?
Yeah, well, we've produced some podcasts for clients as well. And those, tend to be sort of one host or moderator doing an interview, basically, for the most part. Just because they're kind of the easiest to put together. It's something that our clients will be doing anyway, is like talking to us about doing interviews with their customers or with people from the company who have something interesting to talk about. So that's an easy one. If we're already essentially doing an interview, like a lot of the interviews we conduct are done over a video call already. So like recording the audio from that, turning it into a podcast is not that much harder. But as I said before, it's like a blank canvas. So it's whatever you want to do, really. We've had up to, I think the most was 6 people on a podcast one time, where there was a moderator and then 5 different guests.
Carnage, basically.
Yeah, that was like, there was quite a bit of planning there to make sure that everyone sort of had their time, had their 5 minutes to say their bit, basically, when you got that many people, and it was going to be an hour-long episode. So yeah, it can be quite easy for one section to run away from you and for one person talking for most of it. But yeah, I think the one host doing an interview is kind of the easiest format, but adding more people does, particularly if you're doing longer form, 45-minute, hour-long episodes, longer than that, having more people to chip in does like help break it up and add a nice dynamic, like you're saying, when you get more of a discussion going between 3 or more people. Like, that can be really good.
Yeah, so to expand on the format of Something About Science, it's 3 hosts, myself and my colleagues Megan and Skylar, and we take it in turns to present each other different science stories that have been on our sites, and then we discuss them afterwards. And we found that balance is really great because, one, we get to present the work that we do and that we're really passionate about, but secondly, we just get to talk and chat, and we feel like that's the part that people will really engage with, as it feels like you're just listening in on a conversation, which I think is one of the reasons why people like podcasts in the first place. It's not like, I mean, some people do listen to news bulletins, but it's more that chat element and the relaxed conversational side of things that people really engage with.
And then how are you integrating this sort of interview side to the podcast into that format?
So we've done it in two ways. So for longer form interviews, we've actually decided to introduce bonus episodes. So an interview will feature as a bonus episode. One's actually gone out today. And then another way of doing that is what I spoke about previously that some other podcasts do, where they sort of intersperse little snippets of interviews. And we feel like that's a good way to get the message across of what was said in the interview without playing the whole interview. And then we can speak around the interview as well.
Yeah, we had a pretty interesting discussion yesterday in the practice session about the familiarity of the hosts, the format, the day it goes out. How important is all that stuff? Will probably best for you for that one.
Yeah, I think with a lot of that, it's consistency that matters. So like, obviously there's some differences in, when people are likely to listen to it, depending on what day it drops. But the main thing is if you pick, okay, it's like, it goes out on a Wednesday and it's the end of every month. Like if you pick a format, then even if people don't listen to it until the weekend, they're expecting when it's going to come out. They know, they get used to like, oh, this is when it comes out, and they're not surprised when they see it. So that's why it's important to kind of stick to that schedule. And it's sort of the same with the format as well. With the dynamic with the hosts, as long as you're all finding it interesting and engaging, and like it makes the people involved keen to keep doing it, so you can sustain it. Then it's you can do whatever you want really, but making it consistent, having some style that you stick to, gives people that familiarity, so they know what to expect.
So sort of things like the introduction, who does the intro, things like that. Is that really important? Because we were saying yesterday, it's just you can have the smallest change to something that you're familiar with, and all of a sudden it throws you off, and you're not used to it anymore. And it's not got the same experience after that. Yeah,
it really can. People really tie into the familiarity. It's the classic thing for sort of people with YouTube channels as well, is that they always have like a consistent intro and outro. They always greet people in the same way every time. And people do kind of like keying into that. I think it's really interesting. So it's just sort of, how your brains work when you get used to something that you're familiar with. Little departures that just kind of stretch the format that you're used to a little bit that really makes you sort of engaged, makes you pay attention. You're not just going to fall asleep listening to it. It breaks out of the format slightly, but you don't want to stretch it so far that it becomes unfamiliar and it's like new territory. Like you still want to sort of hit those familiar points, those familiar feelings that people are used to.
So overall, building a familiar format, and then every now and then throwing in a little gem that's going to be a bit different to spark the interest.
Setting the rules and then breaking them slightly. Once everyone's familiar.
Yeah, excellent, like that. Speaking of familiarity, Sarah, the branding, the artwork, everything that goes into a podcast, well, any piece of content, but particularly if you're going to launch a podcast series, how important is that?
It's quite important because we are visual animals. With the first thing that comes to mind when we think about something, it's not words, it's just images. And that saying that says a picture paints 1,000 words. It's quite true. So they approach me with a very clear brief, and that's what Danielle has mentioned about previous word that goes behind. This was definitely one of them, because they approached me with three very clear drafts, and they explained what they wanted how they wanted it, the logo and all the art were related to feel and what they like about each draft. And then I think they used Joao just as a spokesperson once, which I really appreciate, because it's just a unified feedback that comes to me with clear steps that this is what we want people to see when they think about our podcast. So I joined all the elements in Canva. That's another point for another webinar, just Canva. Mm-hmm. And then after a couple of versions, we landed on what we really wanted it to look like and what to convey. Different aspects of science all joined by a similar aspect. I don't know the technical name, but there's like a hexagon mesh that joins all the elements. And that is what we want people to think of when they think about our podcast.
And then repeating the same look with social snippets.
Exactly. Just maintain a unified, almost a brand, guidelines, brand style.
Yeah.
That was important to us in particular when we were picking a colour, because we didn't want to pick any of the site colours. For anyone who isn't aware, Azo has yeah, exactly. Each different Azo site has a particular colour, and we actually went with your favourite colour, didn't we? Purple, because we felt like that was a good colour. And we noticed that a lot of podcasts were sort of using blues and reds, so we thought, why not combine the two, make it purple? But another really important thing to note is when people are finding podcasts, if it's not through word of mouth, it's on social media. First thing you see, you don't even listen to the podcast, you see the artwork first when you're scrolling through your platform, whether it be Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You see the artwork first. So we put real importance on developing the artwork.
If someone's setting up a new podcast, either a series or the sort of one-off episodes, how does it work? How do you get them on those channels?
So it can be quite complicated. Obviously, there's tons of different sort of podcast platforms. Spotify, Apple being the main ones, but also Amazon and like a bunch of other like specific ones.
Yeah, how important is Amazon?
Well, this is the thing. So the way we do it, we use a service which essentially distributes the podcast for you to all of those places. So you set it up in one place, and then it trickles through to everywhere else. Which is kind of how podcasts started originally anyway. They're built on RSS feeds basically. So it's literally just, a URL that keeps updating with new episodes every time you post a new one. So most of the platforms will just follow a central RSS feed, and they'll just automatically update whenever a new one gets posted. So the platform we use is called Acast, and there's probably half a dozen really good ones that work perfectly well. That's the one that we got because it just kind of suited our needs. But that lets you set up all of the kind of metadata around the overall show, as well as around each episode, put in the artwork, all that kind of stuff, descriptions, tags, and then you can just schedule when the next one's going to go up, and it automatically feeds out then to iTunes and to everywhere else. So there's a fair bit of setup still for the setting up a new podcast, like a new show, because you need to register that RSS feed on the different platforms, make sure they're all going to see it. And some of them take longer than others to approve it as well. This is another reason.
I was going to ask, is there any sort of approval stage at this when you're first setting up?
There's some of them are more or less instant, like it's a day, maybe two before it's live. Apple in particular takes a while, because obviously the podcast started with Apple, like the iTunes feed is the first one. So a lot of the smaller apps will use Apple's RSS feed from the podcast and sort of go off that. So Apple I think they take a bit of responsibility on themselves to do some sort of quality checking and moderation to make sure that it's not junk, that their feed that gets republished is good quality. So that can take sometimes a week or two. Is something to bear in mind. So what we did with this podcast, and what it's always good to do, is to actually make a trailer. You'll see a lot of podcasts, their kind of first episode is like a 30-second to a minute, maybe 2-minute trailer with like, here's what you can expect from this upcoming podcast. And the technical reason to do that, obviously there's sort of promotional reasons as well. The technical reason to do it is because you don't actually know when the first episode you post to a feed is going to go live, because it will be once it's approved. So it could arrive on Spotify 3 days later. It could be on Deezer the day after that. It could have gone on Amazon straight away. And then it'll be on iTunes and Apple Podcasts within like 2 weeks. And then a week after that, it'll be on Google Podcasts. So if you're trying to hit a release date, that's not very helpful. So if you put out a trailer like that, where it doesn't really matter, it's just going to go out at some point during the promotional period, then you can just kind of let that happen and do that kind of maybe a few weeks, a month before you want to actually launch your first real episode. And then once that feed is set up, once your show is set up on all the platforms, posting new episodes is pretty regular. That's much quicker. That just is a few hours.
I know we spoke about this a bit before. Is it better to have sort of 3 to 5 episodes that go out at the same time at the beginning of a series, or have a teaser, the first one goes out, and then release second, third, fourth, weekly or monthly after that?
Yeah, it's better to stick to the schedule that you are eventually going to stick to. So if it's going to be a monthly podcast, put your first 3 out every month to kind of set that in stone. If it's going to be weekly, same thing, put them out every week. It is quite good to, when people are looking at a podcast, and to see that there's multiple episodes, and if they listen to one and they like it, that there's more to go back to. So yeah, for that first period where there's only one or two there, that's maybe not as ideal, but it's more important to set that schedule, because that amount of time will be negligible if you're going to run it for hopefully years. That will soon, you'll soon get over that. And setting people's expectations of like, it's going to be, first Friday of every month, or, whatever the schedule is going to be. It's more important to set that early on.
And that schedule, just depending on what you can deliver, as opposed to we need to do this every week or twice a week.
That's it.
What you can deliver.
Regularity and consistency is more important than the actual frequency. It doesn't really matter what frequency you pick. You just have to be able to stick to it.
As long as it's good, people will come back. We spoke yesterday about we've done some projects where it's just been a one-off podcast, and then there's been others where it's been a whole series. What is the purpose of doing a one-off podcast?
Particularly if you're going to go down the route of publishing on Spotify and iTunes and stuff like that, a lot of the benefit does come from having a series and having people can subscribe to it and keep coming back, and you have that sort of regularity. Obviously, if you're going to do a one-off podcast, there's a lot of extra setup to get it on all those channels. And then if you're, for the first one, if that's going to be the only one, it's not really worthwhile. If you're doing a one-off podcast, you can think of it more like an audio version of the webinars that you do. So it's essentially you could just embed it on a page on your website, put it behind a sort of, a form fill in if you want to, that kind of thing, and just have it as another piece of longer form content that people can engage with, but that's audio only instead of being a full webinar. So no one has to prep slides and do a presentation. And like Danielle was saying, like sometimes people just want to consume the audio anyway. I know with a bunch of our webinars, we make them into podcasts as well and put them out as podcast episodes too. If that's going to be the plan and there's no particular need to have a visual element, then you think of it more like that, do a podcast instead of a webinar, basically.
Yeah. And you wouldn't bother with the Spotify, the Apple podcast for that? That would just be probably on your website.
Yeah. Obviously it's possible, but the benefits from that really come in the fact that you can subscribe to it and people get notified when the next episode comes out. You don't really get the benefit the first time. You get it when you've built up some subscribers over like the first 3, 4, 5 episodes, and then the 6th one comes out and everyone that listened to any of the others gets notified that like, hey, there's a new one. That's where those platforms come in.
Really. It looks cool though when you've got your podcast on Spotify.
It does look cool.
Show your mum and be like, hey, mum, check this out.
It's totally possible to do. It's just, you don't expect to get a ton of traffic and listens from those channels unless you're doing it over a period of time, would be my advice.
Sure. What about audio content just in general then? So if you're doing a standalone podcast, you'd likely just embed it on your website. I know we do audio versions of all of our webinars, and we give people the option to read, watch, or listen to that content. Is it something we're exploring on News Medical and on the other sites, just to have like an article put into an audio file so that people can listen to it instead of reading it?
It's not something that we're currently doing on News Medical at the moment, but obviously as a website that features many medical conditions such as, hearing loss and sight loss, exploring techniques and ways that we can help anyone who is visually impaired would be great. It'd be amazing to have a audio version of any articles we do upload, so that people who like I said have visual impairment would be able to listen instead of read, and ultimately engage with our content the same way anyone else would.
Yeah, I think it would be good for, like you said, Danny, when you do a webinar, obviously there's a lot of preparation and effort that goes into producing that. So you want to have the written version and the audio version, to kind of get that into, to as many readers, listeners as possible. I think if people are producing that kind of high value piece of content, and if they're thinking of the written piece first, rather than going the AV version first, it would still be worthwhile thinking about, do we do a podcast version? If there's some kind of sort of feature interview with a really important KOL or something like that. If the interview is going to be done over the phone, then think ahead of time about why don't we try and record that in slightly better quality and then do a podcast version as well. That's definitely something that would be actually fairly easy to bolt on to the process, because it's already part of how we work.
For example, when we conduct interviews, if we're doing it over a Teams call, we're recording the audio anyway, and then we're getting it transcribed. So it would make sense to just include the audio anyway, since we've got it.
Yeah, like we said with webinars, we do it for our internal marketing ones. Quite often they're this sort of format, so they're sort of interview style, around the table discussion sort of thing. With most of the client webinars, it tends to be 40 minutes of presentation, then a Q&A. So what we can do for them is we just take the Q&A aspect of that and turn that into an audio file, because the presentation part without the display wouldn't be as relevant. Well, it wouldn't make sense a lot of the time, because they're talking about what they're showing on the screen. But you can take that big piece, and then you've got the video file for the presentation, and then we'll make you a little audio file of your Q&A, and then that's something else that people who maybe don't have the time to listen to the whole hour can take away that 50 minutes. And quite often, it's the most engaging part of the event and most interesting. People get their questions answered, because an audience question is what a lot of people who sat there who don't ask the question are thinking. So they get their own questions answered. And yeah, it's 15, 20 minutes long. You can listen to it on 2 times speed or something like that. And they've managed to engage with that. They've taken in that piece of content. So it's interesting discussion. I'm sure one we'll be talking more about in terms of audio. Let's move on to video content. We'll start with you again. What makes a great product video?
A great product video. I think the important thing with product videos is a little bit like what we're talking about with the podcast, like deciding up front what the sort of tone and the feel is going to be like. I think with a product video, you really have to know the audience, like who's it going to be for? Because a lot of product videos, unlike a lot of other videos, are tailored for people quite far down the buying funnel. They're kind of details about that specific model or specific product. People are probably already going to know, specifically what problem they're trying to solve, or like what kind of product that they need. So it is definitely possible to make a product video for higher up the funnel, or you can get quite technical and like list the details of the specs that you're going to need to make a buying decision. Or it could even be like a demo of for almost after sales as well. For you've got the product, how does it work? How do I use it? People that are that far down the process are already going to be thinking about that. How's it going to fit in my workflow in my lab? There's a lot of kind of variables in there for how you attack it. Whereas something like an interview video that's about an application of a product is always going to be more general interest. It's going to sit naturally higher up the funnel. With a product video, you kind of need to decide where it's going. And I think a lot of the time when they end up sort of disappointing, like people aren't happy with the product videos they've got, it's because there's a mismatch between the audience that they actually want it for and the content and the style of the video.
So trying to appeal to too many people.
Exactly. Yeah. Trying to use it for every purpose.
Yeah. And is that usually because of budget restraints or?
Yeah. Or literally just, they haven't been through that process properly at the front end and thought about, is this going to be a social media, let people know that this product even exists kind of product video? Or is it going to be, here are the specs to know whether you're going to buy it this week or not? Where are you aiming? And those are quite different things.
What are the different ways or the different types of video that you can use to get those messages across?
The sort of deepest version is literally a demo of how it works. I think we always try and include at least some of that, just because even if it's the higher end of the funnel, you want to see how it looks in use. That's always more interesting than just a static product. But the level of detail you go into is quite important there. You're actually going to talk through the steps of how to use it. That's if you're going quite detailed. Is it going to be footage of the product at all, or is it going to be animated? That's the other one the thing that people need to think about. Often particularly for things higher up the funnel, or really it can apply anywhere, but often for higher up the funnel, it's nice to have, it can look more kind of engaging and catchy if it's sort of, the 2D animated videos that we produce that are slightly cartoony and a little bit abstracted. They can be really great for showing how it fits into an application as well, because you can show the product in a illustrated environment that indicates the pharmaceutical industry or the polymers industry or something like that without having to go to plants and film them, which is usually quite complicated in terms of permissions.
Is there any pushback about the sort of seriousness of a 2D animation video?
Sometimes, yeah, people want it to be technical. I think for the most part, when people go down that route, they kind of understand the strengths of that format and kind of play to it. The point is that you want it to be approachable. Scientists don't just read journal papers like they are, they consume content like anyone else. So they'll be drawn in by an engaging illustrated animated video just as much as anyone else would be about any other kind of product. I think you definitely can use it to go more technical as well, and to show things like in a demo style video, you can cut away into the product and kind of show like a kind of a schematic of what's happening inside without having to show any actual proprietary film of the inside of your instruments. So it can be good for that. But most of the time it's better to kind of play to its strengths and lean on the fact that, yeah, it's going to look, it's not going to look that realistic. It can also help as well with if there's a product that you know is going to get updated at some point in the near-ish future, new industrial design, or the software is going to get updated and is going to look a little bit different. If we draw that in a 2D animation, you can abstract a lot of those details away, so it will still be applicable. So you can actually get more longevity out of your product video. It's a classic thing when people, invest a bunch of money and time into making a video, and then the product gets updated, or the software changes, or someone's in the video that leaves the company and doesn't want to be in the videos anymore, and they all have to be re-edited and remade, and it was a waste of time. You can't use the video anymore
Unless you've got some dodgy Photoshop skills. And
yeah. Although it really obviously cutting stuff out, and it's a bad road to go down. Animating, particularly for things like software that does get updated fairly regularly, if all you show in the video is a really crude sort of animatic of a software screen with like gray boxes for a menu and a graph, that's probably going to look the same. You're not going to get people going, well, actually the new software doesn't look like that. If you've used an actual screen capture of version 4, and then when version 6 comes out, everyone's like, this doesn't look the same anymore. That can be a nice way to work around those technical details. So avoiding the technical details actually helps in those cases.
Just going back to the demo video. So when you're doing sort of a typical demo video, is it normally a sort of a 2 to 3 minute teaser where you're looking at the product, some B-roll involved, music playing, that sort of thing? Or is it more, okay, scientist in lab talking us through every aspect of how this machine works? Or are they two separate videos, and can you have both?
That's exactly what I was saying before. They're kind of two separate videos. So yeah, you can definitely plan to get both out of one shoot. But for the higher up the funnel, here is this product, just make it look pretty kind of video. Will almost always use some demo footage, but the exact details don't matter. We just want to illustrate how it looks being used for real. And we've done plenty of that. We'll include that in pretty much every product video that we shoot. But we have also done the full demo type videos where it's literally walking through the whole workflow, going like, right, here is how you boot up the instrument. Here is how you set it up, calibrate it. Here's where the samples go. Here's how you install different sample holders, like every stage, all the way through to using the software as well, walking through that and the process of like, here's how you set up an analysis. Here's how you do, different kinds of sort of processing of the data. There was one that we did for, a full series of demo videos for that ended up being probably about an hour long in total. It was literally a full video manual, essentially broken down into like 1 to 3 minute clips of like doing each little bit like that. And that was for a product that's pretty large and expensive. It was a small angle X-ray scattering system. So these things are like 5 meters long. They take up your entire lab. Buying that and setting it up is quite a commitment. They're quite a small company that make them as well. So it actually saved them a lot of time in like post-sale support, being able to hand that over to the customer and say, right, we'll help you set it up. But then if you need help, go here first, and then ask us if you're still struggling after you've watched the videos. And, it saves them a lot of time in the future.
So on one shoot, we're talking full funnel here. So you've got the teaser, sort of 2 minute video about the product, about some of the benefits. Mm-hmm. You can shoot testimonials if they've got people there who've used the product. The full longer demo, which can either be used either as a book a demo on a site or watch on a webinar or something like that. And then you've got the after sales support with everything that you need once you've bought the product. Oh, I can't remember how that bit works. Here you go. Here's video 24A.
Yeah, exactly. That's literally.
Yeah. So you got the full, from one shoot, you've got the full circle there.
Yeah, that's it. You can totally produce that all from one video shoot if you've planned it out and that's what you're going to get. If you go in saying, okay, we'll film the demo video and then go, oh, could we get a nice little social highlight reel that's 2 minutes long? That's just like, well, probably, but we might be missing some of the sort of hero shots because we were filming a demo video.
Yeah.
So as long as we know in advance what the plan is and we decided like, yep, we're going to try and get both of these, then yeah, that's totally doable. Just
a little note, it's easier to work from the bottom up than the other way around. So if you've already made the effort on filming a long format video, I'm sure that during that video you'll come to little clips and someone demonstrating and saying, in this product, that's amazing, and you just saved our lives in the lab. why not clip in that, add a little CTA, embellish it a little bit, optimize it for social media, and then use it a bit up the funnel. It's harder if you just record a video for social media to then create, to keep moving people up down the funnel. But if you already have that long format content, why not repurpose it and try and attract more people from it?
How important is using authentic B-roll, or does B-roll from sort of stock video, does that work as well?
If there's absolutely no other option, or there's just some copyright issues that you're coming across, then yeah, use stock video. But you're trying to engage with an audience. It's people by people, and people like to see what that product exactly look like and what's the feel of how to use it. So using stock video just overall lowers a bit the quality of your video product. And if you're going through the effort of making a full video production, it's always important to just use B-roll.
What about music?
Exactly the same. Because and we were saying about the podcast aspect as well, the music it's just what you got. So these people consume a lot of podcasts and maybe watch lots of videos. If you're using stock music, it's more likely that they've heard it before. And then therefore they think, oh, they've really not put that much effort into this video. They're just grabbing the first song that popped when you put corporate music and then just download it and put it in. So if you take that little effort and go that extra mile, it's going to bump up your video quality like greatly.
What about, Will, I think you said yesterday, what about when you take the music sort of almost first when you're doing a video and then work around that? Is that something that...
Yeah. Quite often when you're editing a video, it's nice to have the music chosen early on because that will set the tone and the pacing. You don't necessarily need to be like editing directly like to the beat or anything, but even if you're not doing that, it will still set the overall feel, and it can feel odd then if you change it out later for something that's completely different. So getting something that's at least vaguely in the right sort of ballpark of the feel and the tone of the music, it's quite important to choose that early on and kind of decide that, because it does make a big difference to how the whole thing feels.
Are there any other types of video that we're offering now that's a bit different to things we've done in the past, different ways people can sort of showcase their work?
So talking about the 2D animations, one of the things that's been popular lately is to do essentially just a motion graphic animation rather than a full illustrated 2D animation. So with the traditional 2D animations, we're literally drawing every element of like the instrument in the background and like all of it, and then animating that. If you have existing footage, or if you are happy, if it's a video about like a specific application, you are happy to use stuff from stock libraries, then for usually like less cost, we can produce a video that uses sort of nice text and nice transitions and music and voiceover if you want voiceover to kind of tell the story of your product or your company or an application without needing to actually film anything new or draw anything new, both of which are sort of more time consuming.
Yeah. What about hosting of videos? So we talked about this with the podcast, but a lot of work goes into producing really good quality videos, and you'll get your file and you'll think, oh, that looks amazing. That's not even half the battle. So what about first of all, hosting it, where are the places to host a video? And then what about best practices for distribution?
The classic places to host videos, YouTube, Vimeo, like they work really well. They're popular for a reason. YouTube in particular, for some reason, is really well tied into Google search results. Don't know what that's about, but yeah, there's a lot of SEO you can do on YouTube videos with the titles and the tags to sort of help get them into main Google search result pages as well as YouTube search results. The way we work is when a video is finished, we give the client the video file, and that's theirs to own. It doesn't have any of our branding on it. It's all in their brand. So it's just fully under their control then. So yeah, sometimes clients do say like, well, aren't you going to host it and promote it? It's like, well, yeah, we'll help you promote it. But if we host it on our Vimeo channel, which is where we put a lot of our stuff for kind of demo purposes, then we'll get all the views and we'll get the interaction and we'll see all the analytics, and you won't. So it's actually much better practice for the client to put that on their own channel that they own. And then any promotional material we do, if it's getting embedded in content, or if we're sharing it anywhere else, it will all link back to their channel. So all the views, all the interactions will go on there, and they'll see where it's coming from as well with the channel analytics.
So what were you saying the last webinar about short form videos and how they're now key in the sort of the ranking world?
So yeah, tying in with what Will was saying, if you're uploading it to YouTube, which seems to do very well in Google is also promoting short form video. And of course, it's going to prioritize YouTube shorts over Reels or over TikTok videos. But if you're going to upload that video, then it's a good idea to just create a little short snippet that you can use in YouTube and upload a short just to promote that longer form of video, and then use it on social media, drive it everywhere, because then it's going to affect your SEO and it's going to bump up the visibility as well.
How much extra work is it involved if you've taken a sort of a long demo video to create a 30-second reel or snippet?
It's not that much what goes into it, rather than choosing the right snippet and choosing something that is really going to make people stop scrolling and stop consuming other content. So as long as you have that aha moment, that something or a little teaser, something that will drive people to want more or pique someone's interest, then literally chop it up, put it on social media and see what happens. Social media doesn't require that much. Of course, it looks better and it feels better and it bumps your quality if you put a little more effort behind it, but you're not losing anything for just chopping a little piece of your video and putting it up.
So we talked a bit before about how important the music is in terms of when you're doing your videos. What about for the podcast?
Yeah, it's almost even more important because you're going from a video that obviously has a visual element as well as the audio to podcasts that have just the audio. So the music denotes style, but also denotes the structure of the podcast as well. So if we're transitioning from like an introduction to the main section of the podcast, it's really important to denote that with some music. Or a jingle of some kind as well. If you're wanting to lighten the mood a little bit, a quirky jingle is something that works really well.
Doing what we said earlier about the issue with using some stock music, how do we overcome that? Are we writing jingles ourselves? Have we done that for clients? What's the story there?
So for the podcast, one way we've gotten around using generic music is by sourcing music from independent artists, because that music is probably less likely to have been picked up from other podcasts and used in other audio settings. And obviously it helps gain exposure for those artists as well. So it's mutually beneficial.
We have talked about doing original music as well. We may at some point, there's a few sort of musicians in the team, we may end up making some music for the podcast at some point.
A few musicians and a few questionable singers for various Christmas parties.
Well, luckily for a podcast, you only want instrumental music, so there's no karaoke, unfortunately. But yeah, no, we have before done original music for videos as well, for exactly that reason, to get around the sort of stock music syndrome and use something completely new. The only kind of issue with that in terms of workflow, as I said before, it's nice when you're editing a video to start with the music kind of chosen, at least, approximate music chosen, so that you can edit to that and the flow and feel of the video can kind of go with it. The way, when we've worked with a composer, it's been a case of finishing the video first and then sending them that to make the music after the fact. So that kind of changes the process up a little bit, because as a video editor, you're not working with the final music. So the end product will be fine because obviously the music's going to be written along with the flow of the video, so it should still match really well. But it's still a little awkward knowing as an editor that the music's all going to change at some point, and sort of working that way around. And it does, it also, it adds another kind of loop of changes and approvals and everything to the process of making the video, which can, by the time all the stakeholders have signed off and everything, it's going to often be a fairly long process anyway. So also having everyone happy with the music is sometimes easier just to be able to pick from a library than you can, swap between 2 or 3 options quickly.
But what you're saying is it shouldn't ever be an afterthought. The music is not as important, but it is critical. It's really audio-visual content. It's really important.
It's a really important part of the video. Yeah, for sure. It's as important as other, any other aspect of the content and the style.
Yeah. I think just to wrap up, we talk a bit about what we've touched on today, what we've touched on in millions of other sort of podcast webinars, is that people are consuming content in different ways. This setup we've got here is essentially a video podcast setup. We're putting it out as a webinar, but we can repurpose this as a podcast as well. We'll probably put the video out on YouTube at some point too. Why is that so important?
Because you're not just catering for people that only consume video or people that only prefer to listen to podcasts. Even the same person at different times of the day, especially in the multitasking era, will consume the same content in different ways. Maybe right now I don't time and I just really want to know how to do this very specific thing in After Effects. So I just want a 30-second snippet or a little paragraph of how to do it on a blog. Or maybe I have time to sit down and actually learn how to do this more consistently, and then I sit down and I watch a video on the same topic but in a different way. Or I'm just, as Danielle said, maybe I'm just doing the dishes or I'm just doing some chores and I just want to listen and learn about this topic just more passively. So putting your same content and giving the user an option to consume in the way that is not just right for them but appropriate for them in that specific moment of time is really important. It's only going to help raise your engagement, which in turn is going to help your SEO rankings as well.
It also helps kind of maximize on your effort. Doing something like this, obviously it's about an hour of our time plus the setup and the planning and all that kind of stuff. Big pieces of content like this do take a fair bit of effort to produce, and it's nice to know that you're going to get the most value out of it that you can. It's not just going to be one piece of content. You're going to get multiple different types of content and different smaller pieces from this, this one sort of initial burst of effort.
From different points of the funnel as well.
Absolutely. So like what we were saying earlier, from one video shoot, you get all those different types of video. That's a day's work for you, some prep time for the client to get things ready. But then after that as well, you've got the demo video. You could record, you could take a presentation about that product. You could record that. You could get a key opinion leader to do a presentation about how they've used it remotely. You put those two things together, all of a sudden you've got a pretty engaging, interesting webinar. So what we're trying to really get across here is that there are pretty much endless possibilities with any sort of audio visual content. If people have got other ideas and they're listening in of how things they want to try out, by all means get in touch. We've got things to test over the next few months, like LinkedIn Live, YouTube Live. There's lots of things for us down the line. So yeah, it's what we're really trying to get across is that there are endless possibilities and people are engaging content in different ways all the time. So if you've got good ideas, let us know and we can work on them together. Any final thoughts from anyone before we wrap things up?
Thank you for watching.
I'm listening.
Or reading.
All right, so that brings the first part of the webinar to a close. We do have a second shorter part of that interview with Will and João, which we'll share in just a moment. But before we do, I just want to answer some of the questions that have been coming in whilst the interview's been showing. I've been trying to reply to people directly, but haven't been able to get through everyone. So we'll take a few now. There's one here from Tracy who's asking, if you record an interview on Zoom or Teams, etc., and want to publish the audio alongside the written content, where do you host the audio so that you can embed it on your site if you're not doing it on Spotify? So I think the question is, if you're not doing a full series, you just want to have a standalone audio piece, where would you host that in order to be able to embed it on your site? The most obvious option would be YouTube. Although it's obviously a video platform, if you upload it alongside a still graphic, then alongside a still graphic and then download that or embed that, then you've got the audio playing on your site with just a still image of whatever the subject is about. So that would be the best. There are loads of other places you can do, but that's the most likely that people will have access to. Question from Rachel about podcasts. She's asking, have you had any companies launch their own successful podcast rather than just partnering with a third-party group to do the podcast interview? I'm curious how successful podcasts are in lead gen for companies that may be smaller in size. Seems like it'd be difficult to get listeners. Yes, we've done a number of podcast projects, some that are ongoing. So, Rachel, I'm happy to share those with you after the fact today. I'll get in touch via email. The question about how good they are for lead gen purposes. The way we always look at podcasts are that it's a sort of an entry level point for new prospects who might not know anything about your company. So if we go off the thought that 97% of your market, of your potential market, aren't in buying mode at the time, it's one of those forms of content that can get that 97% engaged and interested in what it is you offer. And if the content you put out or the podcast you put out is good enough, then you should be able to turn those listeners into leads, and hopefully the leads into sales. You mentioned about being for smaller size. As we would always suggest with smaller companies that not to try to do too many things at once. Podcast is a big project, even if you do partner with us or with another third party. So yeah, don't take on too much more than you can. That would be our advice there. But in terms of generating leads, yes, it is, but it's a long-term play. Brian is asking, can you record demos remotely for webinars? Good question. We get this a lot as well. We've done one very recently, last week, in fact, where the demo part of the webinar was pre-recorded. We didn't do this. We didn't go to the lab and do it with them. We did it all remotely with them. So that is possible. The benefit for this particular client was that the product they were showcasing was very small. So you could fit it all in one shot, didn't require anyone walking around with the camera. And they had some internal expertise that helped out with that as well. So yes, we can record demos remotely, although it can be a challenge. So it may be preferable that we were to come to your labs to do that, particularly if the products were pretty large. Some more good questions. Excellent webinar. Thank you. As the video webinar blog and case study content writer where I work and someone who really wants to start a podcast, this has been really insightful. Thank you. Well, thank you for that comment, Jenna. Some nice other comments here about the 2D animations, great insights, etc. Great. So if we haven't got to your question, I will carry on replying to you directly during the next part. This next section is about 10 to 15 minutes. I know we're getting close to 3 o'clock. So if you do have to jump off, then thank you for joining us. I will draw everyone's attention to the handout section, which you can find on your screen. Should be on the left-hand side of your screen. You can download information about podcast, webinar, video services. There's a link to the Something About Science podcast, also, as well as the media kit. If anyone wants to book a sort of a discovery call, have a chat, 10, 15-minute chat about your video webinar podcast plans, then please do. You can do that just by following that link. It will take you to my Calendly, and we can set up a conversation. Now we'll play the second video. So like I said, 10, 15 minutes. This is the second part of the interview. This is about the post-production. So if you're interested in this, then stay tuned. All right, so we've replaced Sarah and Danielle with João. João, we're going to talk a little bit about the post-production, but before we do, how about you talk us through the setup we've got going on here today?
Absolutely. So we have 3 cameras. So we have camera 1, camera 2, and camera 3, and Will can tell you a bit more about the specific cameras.
Yep, so we're using 2 DSLRs and a Canon C100, which is a video camera. Fairly, basic cameras in video terms, like they're not huge TV cameras, but they get really nice image quality. And the main issue that you're going to have with something like this is that you need something that will work for like a long runtime. It's the main benefit of using like a C100 video camera over a DSLR. There's no limit on the size of the files it can record. It won't a DSLR stop recording video after half an hour. So you need to be constantly restarting the recording, and then you've got to sync that up afterwards. With the C100, that's not an issue, and it's also got a little fan in it to keep it cool so it doesn't overheat, and a gigantic battery pack. So it lasts forever. It lasts forever.
So why 3? So we can get the different angles. Obviously, when we've done the post-production of this,
so we'll
be able to see what we've done with that.
Yeah, so we have one camera set up as a wide shot to get the whole table in. And then you want essentially a close-up of each speaker. So in this case, because we had 2 camera operators, to have a close-up cam each, they were able to switch back and forth between 2 speakers each, so we could cover all 4 people. If you're trying to do that with a smaller crew, then you need more cameras, basically, so you can set more cameras up and leave them.
So we're doing this pre-recorded because at the time this goes out, you're going to be somewhere in America, Danielle as well, might even be on the flight when this goes out live. If we were doing this live either for ourselves or for a client, and we had the 3 cameras, how would we feed that all through into sort of the one image that the audience would be experiencing?
Yeah, so in that case, rather than editing the 3 cameras together afterwards, we'd do that with a video mixer live. These cameras all have a HDMI output. So they would essentially go into basically a HDMI switcher that can handle transitions and stuff like that. And that would be output pretty much like a USB webcam at that point. The output feed of that just goes into the laptop or the computer that's hosting the webinar.
And all the things that we've added into this, sort of like the name tags going across the bottom, any other features that we've shown in, that can all be done through this.
Yeah, a lot of the particularly the higher end hardware video mixers will do that as well. Or even if you're using a more sort of basic one, you can add that in software. You can use software like OBS, Open Broadcast Studio, which is free. It's one of these pieces of software that's fairly easy to use on a surface level, but it goes incredibly deep. Like it does basically anything you would need sort of to do broadcast wise. So yeah, you could set up any kind of transitions and overlays and stuff that you need to, if you wanted to do, like you were talking about doing a bit of a product demo as part of a webinar, you could have product video style sort of feature bullet points and stuff like that could come up. You could have all those pre-prepared and throw those up live in software. So yeah, that's all. There's a lot you can do with that sort of thing.
So essentially then it just becomes like a TV production.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Nice. Joe, what about, so when you get all these files later on today or probably tomorrow, what is your sort of first step? How do you go about the post-production?
Well, post-production really consists of perfecting the product as much as possible after it's been recorded. So in this case, the fact that, as Will was saying, we have 3 cameras, not only it allows us to have more dynamic movement in the video afterwards, so we have more options of angles and it makes the whole video much more appealing, but it also allows much more intricate audio editing because you can cut down specific sections, for instance vocal fry. If for instance right now I could be hesitating of what to say, you can switch to that camera and the cut has been done smoothly. If you had just one camera, you could do this, and you watch nowadays a lot of content, for instance, on YouTube, more informal, has these abrupt one camera cuts that are done to trim the content as much as possible. But if you want to do something that's a bit more professional or a bit more serious, that's not very appropriate. So having 3 cameras or 2 even is very good. So I would say the first step is to collect everything, the video and the audio, and really look at the options we have and how much editing we can do with those options.
Yeah, we're obviously using 3 stationary cameras today. What if we were to have one and then one as a walk around? Does that work as well?
It's the same. I would say it's the same principle. You just need to make sure when it cuts, you don't have the person who's operating the camera doing a little bit of a weird movement. Everything needs to be cut in a way that it has a specific sequence, but it's the same principle. It's another option. It gives your video more dynamic quality and it just increases the quality overall.
What about the audio? So we've obviously got 3 mics set up here. If we're recording presentations over the internet, often the audio quality isn't necessarily the best, even with a mic. What can you do post-production wise to enhance that?
Well, the principle with this is you can only work with what you have. You know, we're recording with good microphones right now. They're quite close to the sound source, so we can capture quite good audio. We can still improve it much more. I can be speaking now and show how the audio sounds like without any mixing, any effects on top, and you can still see an increase. But so when you record, for instance, in the case of webinars that are remotely recorded with, sometimes you don't have access to a good USB microphone, or you need to use the microphone from the computer, there's still a lot that can be done. You can't perfect it. It will never be the same quality as using a great mic. But saying that, you can still do things that make it a bit more, the audio sound less harsh or more appealing. The most common things to do is, for instance, remove the reverberation of a room. If you're in a big room, usually you will hear a lot the walls. There's plugins and software that can easily be used to do this. Audacity is a great free open source software, but you can use other tools, Logic, Reaper, right? Use Reaper, Pro Tools. There's other types of tools you can use for this. You can watch tutorials on how to use them. So de-reverbing the room, I would say equalization. So choosing, sometimes there's harsh frequencies that you can remove. Often making sure the sound levels are good, which actually when you record with computer microphones is usually the case because the audio gets compressed a lot, but I could be speaking right close to the microphone or away. That creates imbalances. So if you're editing content for a podcast, for a webinar, usually make sure everything is adjusted so that the audio sounds.
And are you putting even more attention when it's for a podcast because it's audio only, or will you be doing this for videos, webinars, podcasts?
I mean, in all types of content, that's something to pay attention to. You know, even I would say, I started with saying de-reverbing, taking the reverberations or equalizing. Those are actually quite special tools. Actually, the first thing people notice is it's really loud and now it's really quiet. That's the first thing you notice if something is well edited or not. Like, and it will actually put people off listening to podcasts.
Yeah. If the levels are inconsistent, you know, between speakers, if you've got an interview where the questions are really quiet but the interviewee is really loud, like that's straight away just, you know, sounds unprofessional. Basically, yeah, it's the first signal is like, is it all consistent? Mm-hmm. And is it roughly the same level as other things you're listening to as well? You know, if you've been listening to other podcasts or watching videos and you put something else on and you have to turn the volume way down on your headphones or turn it way up, that's like, oh, what's wrong with that? Yeah, there's something up. The platforms that you'll upload to will do a little bit to sort of try and normalize the volume between different things. But if yours is way off, then it's, you know, there's only so much it can do.
What are the things that people can do to sort of counteract the sort of lack of equipment? So if people haven't got good USB mic setups or good headsets or what have you, what can they do to sort of make the best of what they do have?
Well, there's a lot of things you can do. I would say try to first of all, record in a room that's not noisy. That's the first thing. Try to record smaller rooms that have, like, for instance, shelves that absorb sound are always good. Like I usually say, do you have a living room with a lot of like shelves? Those are optimal spaces because the sound doesn't reverberate as much.
Couches as well.
Couches, yeah, exactly.
Soft furniture actually helps a lot.
Exactly. So as much as you can, you know, before, those are things that can be fixed afterwards, but only to an extent. So the more you do to prepare, the better. The less work you'll have afterwards, and the more options you have, the better the audio you get to work with afterwards. Same with video, you know, like if you could have the best cameras in the world, you record in a very, very dark room, you know, it's going to be so difficult to make something sound natural when in the first place these things are not considered. So those are. Can you think of other things maybe with sound?
With sound, yeah, I think one of the things is proximity to the microphone as well. I think one of the main reasons that a microphone like this that's on a stand sounds so good is because it's right here next to my face. If you've got a laptop that's on a laptop stand across the desk from you and it's like a meter or two away, it's going to hear a lot more of that room reverberation compared to your voice. Whereas even if it might be a bit unnatural, if it's right under you and you're speaking directly into it, that will help a ton, even just using the laptop mic. Just because the volume of your voice compared to the volume of the room will be, you know, much louder and it will sound much clearer.
Definitely. And I think the last must-have, which a lot of people are familiar with this since the pandemic, we all do meetings online using headphones when you're recording something remote through your webcam. It can't be emphasized enough. People know this because of the feedback, but for recording, it's a must. You know, even though sometimes it can look odd, people don't like, you know, showing their headphones or feel self-conscious about that, which is understandable, but it does make a massive difference in the quality of the audio afterwards. It's a very safe.
So if people have the bare minimum pair of Apple headphones is better than just going with your laptop and trying it with that.
Yeah, I would say always use them.
Yeah. So what's going to be the first step after this in terms of how do you plan out the post-production?
So, well, I'll just have a listen to the audio, have a watch all the cameras and see what can be done with them. I'll also make a few content considerations. Maybe I'll ask you guys, look, was there any topic that you thought this area, I don't know if we were that eloquent, those things can be taken off. You got to also remember,
them, probably.
No, I don't like to work with the philosophy of you need to cut a lot of things, you know, because content is content and it should be there and it should be natural. It's a conversation. You don't want to take out the conversational feel. Saying that, however, you know, we're competing with people's attention spans, and sometimes cutting down a lot of your content, for instance, vocal fry or moments where people are hesitating on what to say, and maybe skip it to the next topic at the end of the edit, you can save about 10 minutes, 20 minutes of a 1 hour conversation. And that does make a massive difference. If you
that much?
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the speaker, it depends on the conversation. It's not something you can generalize. But usually you end up with about 10, 20 minutes of stuff that's been cut that you didn't really need. So as long as you do those cuts and you preserve a bit the engaging part, the conversational tone, and you don't make it too abrupt and harsh, because that's also has its downsides, I would say that's the things to prioritize, really.
So plenty of work to be done there.
Yeah, but it's a pleasure to do it.
Awesome. We'll end it there. Just one final thing. So a question that comes up all the time, be it with podcasts, videos, webinars. When we do a project for a client, who then owns the file? Will probably best person to come through this?
Yep. The way we work is the client owns it. Basically, we try and, particularly with the videos we produce, like we remove ourselves from the process, from the final product as much as possible. All the branding is the client's, and the final file, we just hand it over as an MP4 file ready to upload to wherever they want to. There's no kind of, there's no need to credit us or anything like that. That's all kind of just handed over. And I know it's kind of the same with the webinars. The webinar is their topic, right? It's their product or their interviewee, like whoever's talking about it. We're facilitating the process and we're handling some of the technical stuff, but it's not our product that we're talking about. So why should it be our branding?
Yeah. And do we share the original file so if they can want to do further edits and things like that, they can do?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, just because most people don't want to spend the time, that's why they've asked us to help in the first place. So, it's not a standard thing, but we keep everything on file all the time anyway. Like, we've never deleted a video project. We've got something like 10 terabytes of footage that's archived. So yeah, like we can always like dig stuff up or do more editing later if people want to do that. But if people want to take the video files for themselves, and that's absolutely fine as well. We've handed over, Adobe projects or just sort of renders of the raw files so that people can put stuff together themselves.
Awesome. Will, Joe, thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny.
Thanks, Danny.
And thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren.
All right, so that brings the second part to an end. I hope you found that useful, well, as useful as I did as well. Final few things before we wrap up. Appreciate everyone staying tuned in this long. I know we've gone past the hour, so thank you for taking the time. The handouts you'll find on the bottom left corner of your screen, things for you to download and take away, more content about the topics that we've covered today. So please take a moment to download those. A survey will appear on your screen once you leave the webinar room, so please share your thoughts with us. Any feedback you've got. This is a slightly new format for us today, so please do share what you thought. And you will receive a link with the recording within the next sort of 24 hours, so do share that with anyone, any colleagues, peers who might find it useful. If you can share a key takeaway on social media as well, we'd really appreciate that. And that pretty much wraps things up, so thank you very much for joining us again. We hope to see you at the next one, which is coming in mid-April, and I wish you all a very pleasant rest of the day.